Mr. Stephen Deason. He is the CEO of a company called Opa, and he is going to share his thoughts with us about machine learning. Let's welcome him.
Okay, can we top the music now? Yeah. So I wanted to see, is this on? Can you guys hear me? All right. So that is by Emily Howell. Does anybody know who Emily Howell is? So Emily Howell is an AI that writes really quite amazing music, and that one is actually called From Darkness into Light. So can we adjust these lights a little bit? Get them up? All right, so I'm going to warn you guys right up front. My name's Stephen Deason. I am the founder and CEO of a group called Opa. We are an organization focused on recovery. And the idea behind Opa is it's the Greek word, so Opa, right? It's a celebration of life. And Rasa is the essence. How many of you are over 2 years old? A couple of you, right? Somewhere around 2, you decided that you had property rights. Property rights were something that you owned, and somebody took them away from you. From that point forward in your life, you've been in recovery. Every single human being in this world is in recovery in some sense. And by the way, just so you know, Scott, I have your business card. I'm not afraid to use it to call you guys out. I've been meeting a bunch of you over the last few days. All right, so the topic of the conversation today is ML, or machine learning, will redesign and not replace jobs. Let me give you a bit about my background. I have an eclectic one even for us. Started off with undergraduate degrees in pure mathematics, chemistry, went to medical school, dropped out to write regression analysis programs, got into computer science. I like to tell people I broke my teeth on an Amdahl 5995 12-way running MVSOS 360. So I've actually loaded punch cards and written COBOL code and spent a long time in computer science. I then went back to school a little bit. So some of my doctoral work, I have a few master's degrees that I've gotten in about 318 graduate hours. I like school a lot. I just like to study. I think it's really interesting. So one of the things that we're going to talk about here is what is machine learning and what does the future look like? So we're going to start off. I love futurists. I want to know how to get a job. Anybody in here a futurist? Really, I've got one of you. Okay, after this, I want to know how to become one of you guys because it seems like the greatest job ever. I'm going the wrong direction. So Kurzweil is a futurist, and he talks about machine learning in 5 stages. The first one is this. Faster computing leads to faster innovation. Faster solutions to hard problems are the result of that. Magic happens. Disease, hunger, energy, etc. are all solved. And then we reach immortality. And we don't need our bodies anymore. Everybody with me so far? And the beauty of it all is that at the end of the day, we're one giant interconnected hive mind. Okay, I'm done. My lecture's over because we're at the singularity. Q&A. Anyone? I'm not afraid to get down in the audience, guys. I will come down there in just a minute. So I'm actually joking, and maybe I'm not, right? We don't know what the future holds, and that creates a lot of fear. Human beings are, in general, driven by a deep-seated fear, right? So my doctoral work is in behavioral economics, specifically around contracts and how we do incentive systems, how we build incentive systems that get people to perform well. But really, I just wanted to see if I could shock you guys into a little bit of wakefulness because I was noticing some nodding heads earlier. Okay, so let's tie back to day one. Scott, who I still see back there playing on his computer, opened Tuesday morning by discussing security breaches related to phishing. If you had told me when I graduated high school that I could get a job related to stopping phishing, I would think that I was going to be a game warden, right? That is a brand new job that nobody had ever heard about 20 years ago, probably 10 years ago. I had no idea what it was. And then Dr. GP followed up with reinforcement learning and talked to us about that. And we had some lovely math equations, and we'll get to those in a moment. Whether we use supervised learning, unsupervised learning, or reinforcement learning to help us with a task is not nearly as relevant as a simple thing I want you to think deeply about. Changes in technology lead to changes in the ways that we interact. How many of you either have millennials as children, hire millennials, or are a millennial? I'm expecting every hand to grow up at this point. Okay. How many of you have interacted with a millennial and had this conversation? Only one person. Good. Okay, so the rest of you are having great conversations with millennials. But they talk to their phone a lot, right? They really communicate this way. Changes in technology drive how we interact. And we are, this thing's not having fun for me. Can we go back? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And as inherently social creatures, this drives the way, changes in the ways that we work and we live. Why is that so important? Can we go on? Let's play at macroeconomics for a minute and let's talk about 4 really important concepts. First, I'm going to let you do it because I'm not very good with this pointer apparently. What's the trend between wages and production telling us? It's telling us something very, very important, and we're overlooking it because we're complaining about it. I'll get to that in a moment. The second one, machine learning functions are simply utility functions. Does everybody understand that? You know what a utility function is, right? It's just a happiness function. So you look at a Cobb-Douglas production utility function where you've got capital inputs, you've got labor inputs, and you've got some kind of constant factor. And the reason we do that is because it makes it relatively trivial to work with mathematically when we're doing partial derivatives on it. But the truth is that there are an infinite number of utility functions. There are an infinite number of functions out there that tell us if we have these inputs, what level of happiness do we get out? The example that Dr. GP used on the board the other day was he had a car that was driving, and I think it was Google Deep Thought or one of the other programs was trying to keep it there, right? Was trying to keep it. What was the happiness quotient? The happiness quotient was not wrecking. The car was not running into other cars. That would be an unhappiness quotient. We want to try to find happiness. Next. I want to talk about future scenarios, frameworks, foundations, and accelerators. And I'm going to do that pretty quickly, but I'm going to give you some futurists you can go look at if you're interested in that sort of thing. And then the last one is new power dynamics, because we are seeing a mass sea change in how power is distributed in our society. It is fascinating. Okay, can we go on to the next slide, please? From 1947 to 2009, this is the most recent data that I had access to, we had prosperity. We had an almost perfect linear correlation between work, productivity, and wages. That was really amazing. And then about 1978 or 79, we started to see a big drift. The delta, over on the right side of this graph, from 1980 until 2009, it said until now, but it's continued to expand. You can see that productivity curve is becoming exponential. The difference between wages have remained almost flat, and we hear this in the news all the time. Wages haven't changed. Well, the truth is that they actually have. The value that we get out of the amount of money that we spend has increased tremendously. I graduated from high school in the Deep South. The first car that I purchased did not have air conditioning in it. Air conditioning, I think, was a $1,700 option at the time. If you've ever driven around in the Deep South or maybe out here in Vegas in a car with no air conditioning, you know how valuable that is. Today, that same car, the cost of that car really hasn't changed all that much. What I can purchase with what I have has changed dramatically. I'm not getting into the right or wrong of that, and that's a whole different conversation that involves, presidential candidates that I'm not interested in discussing. But the key point here is we're seeing a big gap between productivity and wages. I think that's going to continue to increase. Can we go on? There's the disconnect between productivity and wages, and here's the fun part. Next one. We as humans, we like to fuss about this a lot. We talk about it all the time, right? It's all over the news. It's going to increase. Why? Because machine learning is going to make us better able to engage in all sorts of really fun activities. And some of us place a great deal of value on the activities that we engage in. I expect most of us do, particularly the people in this room. Can we go on to the next one? So what's the trend telling us? I think I already covered this. The delta is likely to accelerate. What's the accelerant? It's technology. So let's hit the other side really quickly. All right. No, not all of it. You killed me. All right. So what does this have to do with reinforcement learning, and where is the cool math already? You guys ready for some cool math? I see there are a few of you who are pretty excited about it, right? So this is the Bellman equation. The Bellman equation underlies reinforcement learning. We're basically doing a Bellman optimization. I'm going to move through this really quickly because it's math and it bores about half of you, and half of you it really excites. Okay, so the Bellman equation looks something like this. In effect, we have some sort of future state of the world. We've got a gamma function on there that gives us a discount value on that. Did anybody know why we stick that gamma function in there? It's because it makes the math tractable. We range gamma between 0 and 1. Typically in a Bellman equation, we range between 0.9 and 0.99, and it allows us to actually get rid of an infinite sum that's intractable mathematically. It's kind of a pain in the butt to deal with. Plus, it allows me to draw a whole bunch of backward sixes on pages and put little upside-down triangles all over the place and do really cool stuff on a board. And I get to put little tick marks all over the place. It's tons of fun. If you haven't ever done it, try it. Okay, so the Bellman equation is just a utility function. It's basically saying there's some future state of the world and there's a present state of the world, and I'm going to discount the future state of the world a little bit, and I'm going to have the present state of the world valued at a current value. It's a discounted cash flow model, right? This is nothing more than a finance model that we're predicting value under. Value is happiness. All I'm saying here is that the maths are converging, right? So whether the math is finance or it's tensor calculus and we're doing flow equations across gradients, it doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do is we're trying to find a unified place of happiness. We're taking these things and we're slicing projections and we're doing differential calculus on them. It's a ton of fun, but it doesn't really solve the problem. What's the problem? Let's keep going. They're just utility functions, right? What is a utility function? If we look at behavioral economics, we see that a utility function takes 4 types of input. Can we hit those? Form, time, place, and possession. What is the thing that I am getting access to? Is it available when I want it? Where is it? And who owns it? I love the blockchain discussion that we had earlier. We had a lot of blockchain discussions. Blockchain is really good at telling us about possession. Who has something? Right? All of these are inputs to a function system that's a utility function. And a utility function just measures happiness at the end of the day. We like to use a lot of complex words. Is everybody with me? You guys are all interested in being happier? Then you're all interested in machine learning. Machine learning is all about finding and optimizing curves over happiness, right? Let's go to the next one. So utility, form, time, place, possession equals happiness. Machine learning is about doing this over different periods of time, but that's really all that we're doing. Okay. So what are the inputs to this happiness function? Here's where things get complicated. There are a ton of these things. Could we hit the next slide? How about another futures with some example inputs, right? So I love this guy. This guy does a great job with these hockey puck slides. One more. There we go. Perfect. So Frank Diana. So Frank talks about 3 things. He talks about future scenarios, which is this big black section you see right here, right? So technological unemployment, a decline in fertility rates, changing notion of work, et cetera. Innovation accelerators, 3D printing, renewable energy, IoT, cognitive systems, nanotech, and then the technological foundation that underlies all of this, the internet, social, cloud, mobile, machine learning, big data. Everybody with me? These are the inputs. These are the inputs to the utility function. Changes in these things, the matrices that come out of these flow into this. What flows into it and what comes out of it are very different things. So I'm going to challenge you on something. Does everybody understand the difference between 2 concepts? What is a work? What is work versus what is a job? Give you just a quick second to think about that. Yes, sir.
Around doing this. Like the job is the task and the work is I'm actually doing the work.
So there's a great deal of truth to that, right? We live in a capitalistic society. I'll throw this out there. We live in a capitalistic society. In a capitalistic society, your value comes from 2 things. 1, how much you get paid, and 2, what you do. Is that fair? That's a pretty broad statement, so you can argue with it. Probably could make a really good argument against it, and I'd probably agree with you, but just stick with me on that for a moment. I would challenge this. So Rudy Carson is a guy, and I'm over here with my notes because I was looking at this again this morning to make sure that I had it right. Jobs are a subset of work, and work is meaningful. Work is what we do that brings us value. Jobs are what we do that puts money in our bank account. So I would say that fundamentally machine learning, because of its ability to reduce the amount of repetitive tasks that we have to engage in, machine learning is going to dramatically shift us from the meaning of the job to the meaning of work. One of the things that I love about what Rudy says is he said, look, maybe these are the things that you have, and I want to get this exactly right. He said, some of us like to build economic engines so that we can play. And I imagine most of you in this room fall into that category. That's why you're here, right? It's a selection bias issue. Most of you like to build economic engines. That's what you're building. You're building companies, you're building organizations. You like to go play with those, whatever happens, right? Other people find value in a yearning for significance. I love that word. He said, a yearning for significance. And then a third thing that we might do is we might want to serve humanity. Some of us like to combine those things, and we like to move them around. We like to see a Venn diagram of where can we serve humanity while we're building an economic engine, while we have a yearning for significance, right? But does that resonate with you guys a little bit? Machine learning should, properly done, allow us to do more of what drives meaning in our life. Man's search for meaning, right? Machine learning should reduce the number of repetitive tasks. I actually had this conversation, I thought, in a pretty important forum. I was at a CFO forum, and I was talking with a whole bunch of accountants, and they're really worried that their job is going to go away. And I said, really, do you guys really like to enter debits and credits? Right? Is that really what you trained for 5 years to do, is sit around and enter debits and credits? Or did you train to actually be a strategic business advisor that can help other people and individuals interpret what the data systems flowing through their business are telling them about that business's behavior? Oh. I said, okay, so I was talking, some of them were auditors, and they really do love the debits and credits, but I know a couple of you guys are probably in that group, right? Not a one of you. Not a single one of you. Okay, can we go on to the next one? So what are all the inputs to the happiness function? Well, again, there are a ton of them. You saw them before. And that futurist with the example inputs, so how about some sample jobs? And what I'm actually hoping here, if we can go on to the next screen, is that I can read it here, because it's so big I can't read it on my computer screen in my room, even with my glasses. There are jobs on here, I've never even heard about this stuff. What is a brain interface? Bioelectronics, desalination engineering. This is exciting. I am as excited as I have ever been. Do you guys know why? Because we are on the cusp of the greatest explosion of jobs in the history of our species. Everything that we have been doing up to this point has been created. We crushed the industrial age, right? The knowledge economy, all of these different words that we've come up with. But as humans, what we've done is we finally created enough machines that we can offload the repetitive, boring things we don't like onto them. Now, the challenge we run into, as Bill and I were talking about yesterday, is this. What do you do when you're speaking to a room full of people who think their job is inherently tied to their ability to climb a cell phone tower, right, and evaluate that thing? How do you talk to them about how machine learning is going to alter that fundamentally? Your job is no longer tied to your ability to climb a tower. Your job is tied to your ability to understand the inputs that you're getting from the drones you're flying up the side of that tower and evaluating it. Your ability to look at that over time. Changes in those towers become very important, right? Your ability to evaluate things becomes really important. Your ability to physically do labor becomes less and less so. Certainly your ability to stay focused on repetitive tasks becomes less. I say, well, how many of you are excited about a world in which your creativity matters more than your ability to do routine tasks? I'm getting a bunch of hands on that one. Some of you like to do routine tasks. That's also cool, right? Okay, can we go on to the next one? So a couple of more futurists said, how is this going to, and this is a really interesting question, how is this going to fundamentally shift the power dynamics in our world? Jeremy Hymans and Henry Timms talk about this. Can we bring that up? Our old power values, we lived in a world of managerialism, institutionalism, exclusivity and competition, discretion, confidentiality, separation between private and public spheres. I don't know, again, let's go back to this. How many of you have millennials as employees? Have you noticed they have no sense of what's public or private? Almost none at all. It's quite remarkable, right? They just don't think about the world in that way. We had professionalism, specialization, long-term affiliation and loyalty, and less overall participation. We are moving to a dramatically different world. Why is that so important? Because machine learning is enabling that. Because as machines remove repetitive tasks, we have to find meaning in other things. That other thing is in connectivity. It's in connectedness with you and me. You and I can have conversations that we never had before because we have time to get to know one another, to care for one another, or we have time to hate one another. Right? And that's dangerous. So we need to work on that. We need to think about how these things impact people. We need to think about what our behaviors are when they're driven by fear. When people are afraid they're going to lose their job, instead of afraid that they're going to get paid a sufficient wage to do something different, that's a deep-seated fear that we need to address as a society, and that machine learning is going to continue to push up and bubble up for us. But if we have meaning in what we're doing, and if we have meaning in connecting with each other, then we have a tremendous opportunity as a species to advance. We're moving toward a world in which we have opt-in decision making. I'm just going to read these because, that's what you're supposed to do when you're on a stage. Open source collaboration, cloud wisdom sharing, radical transparency. I love this idea. I love this idea of being radically transparent in the world. We are working in a do-it-yourself maker culture. Most of you are probably makers. That's why you're here, right? You like creating stuff. Some people don't. Some people would rather take vacation and go create memories, and maybe that's a type of making. I don't know. Short-term conditional affiliation, more overall participation. So we hire people off of Upwork. We bring them in, they do a job, they're there for 2 months, they go do something else. We see a lot of that, right? There are tons of platforms like that now, task-based platforms. We know that. It's called the gig economy, right? This whole idea that people's work in their life is changing dramatically so that you get to do what's meaningful for you at that particular moment in time, relating to the people you enjoy to relate with, and then you can move on and do something else. Fundamentally altering society. It's really, really cool. Let's go on to the next one. Look at the companies that have risen up, these crowd-driven corporations. Wikipedia, Etsy, I think I heard mentioned yesterday again, certainly LinkedIn, HuffPost, et cetera. Some of the old castles, the Nobel Prize, which I'll obviously never win, the Britannica, the NSA, these old places that sort of have these large moats around them, and they're not very well connected, right? What do you think about when you think about those companies versus when you think about the Googles and the LinkedIns and the Facebooks? Right? You think about forward progressing? Do you think about holding things back? I don't know what the answer is in your mind, but I think it's something that bears thinking on. Okay, let's go to this. So to summarize, machine learning, I think we are a very, very long way from being replaced. Right? Our humanness is going to matter more and more over time. We are entering a time of unprecedented change. We're seeing a mass sea change in the number of jobs available. The number of jobs is going up. The type of jobs is changing radically. Right? Unprecedented opportunities. We have, by virtue of all of the math, right, and all of the programming and the speed of computers and the cloud and everything that are coming together, we are on the precipice of one of the most amazing times in human history. Now, I think, my opinion is that's going to create more space for us to be human and to relate to one another in meaningful ways, and I think that's going to be how work changes. I'm not going to be glued to my screen, I'm going to be glued to you. Okay, that was terrifying for about 6 of you. I got it. I wanted to get at least one laugh out of somebody, and it failed, didn't I? Okay, and we're going to, and the whole purpose of this is to generate greater utility for all of us, greater happiness. Does everybody buy into that? You can argue with me in just a second because I think we're at the end of this. So I'll end with this. I think we've got one more. Can you hit the next slide? Thank you. Yeah. So Alvin Toffler, who's one of my favorite futurists, actually said something that was really interesting. He said, illiteracy in the last century was an inability to read or write. Illiteracy in this century is going to be defined by an inability to learn and unlearn at an incredibly rapid pace. Think about that. Illiteracy in this century is not going to be defined by an ability to read or write. It's going to be defined by your ability to learn something, know it to be true for that moment in time when you need to act on it, and then unlearn that thing as quickly as possible. Because we're going to continue to uncover new things. And I may go being a fishing expert, and I might actually just mean that I'm going to go hang out with the Forest and Ranger Department. All right, thank you guys very much. Oh, and I have time for questions. Any?
So my question is about the learning and unlearning part. I've always been a big believer that to be successful at the speed that things are changing at in today's society, you have to be willing and able to fail fast. Would you say that kind of fits the learning and unlearning part? Because when I fail, I need to learn from that. But in sports, if that becomes muscle memory, you're going to fail a lot, right? So are they kind of related concepts?
I think they're incredibly related concepts. We were talking earlier today, early this morning over breakfast, about the idea of smart contracting. One of the problems in blockchain with smart contracting is that I'm writing computer code that assumes, so in economics, there's this concept in contracting called complete contracting or incomplete contracting. There's no such thing as a complete contract. Okay, academics will tell you there's a way to get around it, but there just really isn't, because I can't predict all the future states of the world. I don't know whether it's going to be raining or sunny outside on a day that's 365 days from now. I have no idea what the future state of the world is. I don't know the future state of my own shoe size, for God's sakes, much less how things are going to be in the Middle East, right? The problem with that is that as the future state of the world continues to increase in its changing and the information environment becomes more and more full, right, that our preconceived notions mean that we have to get better and better at anticipating and moving and responding to those future states of the world. Well, how does this relate to your topic? The question that you ask is this: if I fail, right, if I fail fast, and I totally agree with you, we have to learn to fail faster, but we also have to learn to pick ourselves up quicker, and that requires more connection, because it takes all of you to pick me up, right? And I don't mean all of you just in this room, I mean all of humanity. It takes all of us to lift each other up. As we learn to fail faster, we're going to fall down, we're going to get up quicker. Does that help answer your question? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
At the showed the productivity over time versus wages, and in a lot of ways I see that as more of a political problem than like a problem of resources being created, because for example, the reason the minimum wage hasn't changed very much in the last few decades is a political problem. That's not economic. That's not, we need new technology to increase the minimum wage. So I find it interesting, just looking at the technology problem, looking at the machine learning, looking at the futurism, how much of the problem is simply humans holding ourselves back by how we're organizing systems of government, systems of work, systems of economics. And so I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on kind of where the machine learning, where that growth is going to run up into problems that we need to solve even more culturally, or even just how we think about running the world together, and where we're going to. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, so at the risk of putting my foot into a political quagmire here, just for a second, I don't actually see it as a problem at all. Here's why. First of all, the question that I would ask is, do I have sufficient means to meet my needs? And then the choice question that I need to be able to answer is, do I need more, and for what? So in my first job, I was given, years and years ago, I was given a ledger, and there was this really, what the business was paying me to do was to produce a financial projection for, it's my first job, it was the first company I worked for, but they basically gave me a sheet and said, here, figure out a cost model for this, outsourcing deal, right? It took me, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 weeks to pull all that together. Today I could pull that entire model together in, I don't know, 4 hours, right? The internet has changed that dramatically. The Excel has advanced tremendously in the last 25 years. My productivity has soared, my ability to put output, but the company still only needs the cost model, right? So back then they were willing to pay me however much money they were willing to pay me to sit around for 4 or 5 weeks and make a bunch of phone calls and irritate a whole bunch of people all over the country and try to figure out the data. And today they would expect me to do that in much less time. So I think we confound things in the sense that my time, people start to say things like, well, my time isn't as valuable as it once was. I'm producing more in the same amount of time, so I should get paid more. I don't know that that's the right answer. I think a better answer or a different answer to consider would be, we hired a guy a little while back and, he worked for 3 days and then he decided to go on a bike ride. No judgment, right? I mean, I didn't pay him for the bike ride and I was a little bit frustrated at the moment, but then I thought about it and I thought, well, I guess he made enough money in those 3 days that, and he's in sales, and he said, I'll make a bunch of calls when I get back. And I was like, well, that wasn't really what I was anticipating when we hired you, but he doesn't work for us anymore. But but okay. There are my point on that is there are all sorts of different ways that people can drive value in a way that makes sense for their life. And that's going to cause mass changes between the amount of productivity and the amount of wages. And I think we need to look more carefully at that as a society instead of just kind of throwing it all up onto two graphs and saying there's a gap here and it's a problem. I'm not sure that it is. I'm not sure it isn't, but I'm not sure it is. Fair?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So you're talking about a specific set of people, I believe, in that, especially when you talk about desalination engineers or all that huge graph of jobs that you had, and the people that don't jump on board that bus. Meaning, if you go to Texas or California or probably even in Nevada, the homeless populations are growing. So
absolutely.
So with machine learning taking those repetitive jobs away, what do we do with the people that don't want to get on board with that? Do we keep some of those jobs available, farmers or whatever, so that they always have something not difficult to do and just go to work for 8 hours and get paid and come home? Or do we just say, well, you guys, if you don't want to jump on board, I'm sorry, but we're going to leave you behind?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I don't know the answer. I served as fractional chief financial officer for a group called Literacy Action, which is all about teaching adults who are generationally challenged in literacy. And they look at it in twofold, right? One is financial literacy, and the other one is teaching people actually how to read and write. And it's a real challenge when you get generationally enmeshed in, my parents didn't know how to read, my grandparents didn't know how to read, nobody reads at home. What do I do for my kids when they come home? And so I think the reason I say that is just to say that this hits me very deeply and personally. The people you're talking about, according to Alvin Toffler, are the illiterates, right? They are the people who are unwilling to unlearn old skills and relearn new skills very, very rapidly. Because as machine learning rises up, particularly as reinforcement learning becomes more active, that's sort of the frontier of machine learning at this point, is that what I think we're going to find is that machines are going to start to very, very rapidly take over any job that has any repetition in it. And so we all of us are going to have to very quickly figure out, like, okay, well, I'm doing this job for 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years, and then I have to retrain and change to something else. The interesting thing about that when you look at cognitive science is that that's actually good for our brains over time, but we'll see. So the answer to me is we've got to figure out, societally, we have to figure out how to take care of those people who are unwilling to do that. I don't know how to do that, though. I have no idea. I'm not, by the way, my training's microeconomics, not macro, so. Yes, Mike? Are we done? Okay, thank you.
I think when you speak of Toffler, for example, and his thoughts, I think what we're presupposing here is that a disruption is complete. So if you look at a disruption in the marketplace, you know what? Cars replaced horses in New York City. There are still horses in New York City, and there's still cops on horses in New York City. And when you look at the farming example, for example, corporate farming has taken over middle America. However, those farmers that have found a way to adjust and find new markets are thriving, right? Whether it's the people that don't put chemicals in their cows that are giving us milk, or the guy that's making goat cheese and selling it to regional high-end restaurants. I don't think market disruption always ends up with a complete displacement of the prior product. I think if you're creative, you'll find a way.
I think that's brilliant. I go to farmers markets quite frequently, and I buy, artesian cheeses and all sorts of things that are about the same price as they are in the grocery store made by large, mega firms. And I buy those too. So you're exactly right. I mean, I think there's a place for all of us, right? Because to me, what really matters, what fundamentally matters for all of us is our humanness. And I just want to keep tying back to that, right? We are people, and at some point, we are social animals, if you believe that, or whatever your belief system looks like. We're social animals. We will figure this out. One of the things we need to be very conscious of in the interim is how much fear it pushes into the population. Really important that we do that. Am I done? All right, thank you guys so much.